Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a great day. You might be reading the title of this video and wondering, what do you mean, what games will the Steam Machine play? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't really understand what you're trying to get at, Rice. Well, let me go ahead and just kind of break it down for you. So when the Steam Deck first originally came out, there was kind of a big question on will it actually play every game on Steam? And to be honest, it's a question that kind of still comes up a lot of the times when we're talking about Steam Deck, now as we're talking about Steam Machine, and then also when it comes to bigger AAA titles. I think it's a question that is going to be on a lot of people's mind is, will this game that I want to play, will this big AAA experience run on my Steam hardware? So this video is really dedicated to just kind of break down the reality of games running on Steam hardware, to kind of debunk myths, let you know what games may actually have some problems, and what it looks like to actually play games on Steam hardware. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So I think Valve was extremely smart that one of the biggest games that they had people try on the Steam Machine to get press coverage on it, to let people know how it ran, was Cyberpunk 2077. Now, the reason I think that that was a perfect game for them to really show what the Steam Machine is going to be capable of is because that is a very demanding game, and I would argue that between that and Baldur's Gate 3, it's probably one of the most demanding games on most people's PCs. Now, we've had some time to really digest what the specs are on the Steam Machine, and to give you guys some understanding as far as what I know about the specs on the Steam Machine are actually very similar to what I had on my last PC. So when I was running games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Baldur's Gate 3, it was a 3060, I believe is what I had at the time. I don't remember the CPU I was running with, but essentially what I was running with was extremely similar to what the Steam Machine hardware is going to be. Now, technically the Steam Machine would be above what I had, but still it is pretty comparable and pretty close to what you're going to actually get. So just to give you guys an example or an understanding of where I'm coming from when I'm talking about these specs. So with what they showed, they were actually able to get Cyberpunk running about high to medium settings when it comes to the Steam Machine. They were able to also get it at 4K 60 with FSR. However, I really don't think that's going to be the ideal way for most people to play that game. Ideally, what you're going to want to do is probably keep it about 1440 or 1080 and actually play it like that. Now, that might sound kind of discouraging, especially when we're talking about a brand new piece of hardware and it's supposed to be able to play all these games at the highest settings. However, if you really think about this, this is kind of what modern consoles are already doing. The modern consoles are not really playing 4K 60 on all of games like Cyberpunk. What they're really doing is targeting a 60 frame cap, but also giving you the resolution at 4K. So it's trying to essentially optimize the system to make it so that it's running as close to 4K 60 as it could possibly do. And to be fair, it does a pretty good job. I don't think it's actually that bad. I've played Cyberpunk on a PS5. However, I never really felt like it was true 4K 60. I just felt like it was more of like, well, you can play it in 4K and you can try to get as close to 60, but really you're getting probably closer to about 50, 55 maybe frames. You're going to dip a lot between 45 and I'd say 55. You're not really getting that consistent 60. My point in breaking all this down is to let you know the reality of what you're already kind of used to seeing, especially if you're coming from a console or if you've been playing on lower end hardware PCs for the last 10 years. You're going to understand that this is kind of a pretty close comparison. It's not as big of a gap as it may originally seem. What it ultimately means is that your games are going to be able to play on this thing. As far as the hardware and the specs go, there is not going to be a game that you are not going to be able to run at least minimum 30 frames on this thing. And I would almost bet that you're probably not even going to have a game for the next 4 to 5 years maybe that will actually not be able to run even at least 30. That last part is complete speculation. I don't actually know for sure, but it seems like the hardware is pretty sound and that you're not going to have an ultimate problem. Especially if we're comparing this to older graphics cards. I know somebody who's still using a 1060 and is still able to play most modern things. Now, as far as the Steam library itself goes, as far as how it's going to run on a controller, as well as the fact that the Steam Machine is a Linux-based system. For those of you who are not in the tech world, essentially Linux is the third operating system behind Windows and Mac OS. It's a third-party based system that is very open and very freeing. However, there's not a lot of optimization for it. But one of the reasons Valve is the perfect person to tackle this problem is because they've actually kind of already done it. On the Steam Deck itself is actually a Linux-based system. However, it's able to run all these games that are specifically made to play on Windows. Which in layman's terms basically means that any game that you see on Steam should essentially be playable if we're just talking pure hardware and even software. Now, of course, there are going to be some games that are not going to make a lot of sense in the beginning because they might need a little tweaking, they might need a little configuring. A lot of games used to use launchers, and some still do. Cyberpunk is actually a good example of that, where you might have to boot up the launcher first, and then you might have to actually click, hey, I want to play this, and then once you boot into the game, it's going to feel exactly like a normal thing. But that is something to kind of be aware of. Now, thankfully, Steam does have their own ranking system, or rating system, I guess I should say, for if a game is going to be playable. They have it, and they've been using it for the last few years on Steam Deck. What I will say is it's not always correct, because many games that are not verified for Steam Deck actually do play on Steam Deck. I would say there's very few games, if any, that have actually had a problem playing on the Steam Deck, which means in tow that there really shouldn't be almost any issue with Steam Machine. But on the flip side of that, there are going to be some verified games that you might wonder why they're verified, because maybe there's a quirk to them where they don't play completely right, or maybe the text doesn't pop up right. They might need a little bit of configuration on your part. The one thing I will say though is that there has never been a time where I've been playing a game that was verified on Steam Deck that I felt like was not able to be played. It just maybe needed a little bit of tweaking on my end. The one thing that I think a lot of people are going to be curious about though, and it's something that I think is a very fair question, because it's not really something that you deal with a lot on Steam Deck per se, but Steam Machine, because it's more powerful, is going to have more availability and option as to what you can play on it and what you'd want to play on it. And that kind of leads us into multiplayer games. So in the modern era, we play multiplayer games, and almost all of them use some type of anti-cheat system, because obviously they want to keep the game fair, they want to be able to keep things balanced. And games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, they use these anti-cheat software to make sure that their games that they have made for years and years and years, and they've balanced, they want to keep things competitive and safe. So when it comes to how anti-cheat software works on SteamOS, it's a very slippery slope, because in a lot of cases, a lot of multiplayer games that I've played, I've been able to play on SteamOS no problem. Specifically, I think Dead by Daylight was one. I want to say that games like Left 4 Dead and a lot of MMOs, games that are not maybe as fast-paced as something like a Call of Duty or a Battlefield, or maybe as grandiose, but it really comes down to what type of anti-cheat software you're going to have when it comes to these specific games. Now, because the Steam Machine is a PC, technically you can just download Windows on it and bypass these issues. However, if you're buying the Steam Machine as something that you can basically plug in and just start playing on, that's not exactly an ideal situation for everybody. So what Valve has told us is that they are working on trying to get anti-cheat software to be working on this day one. I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm not sure, and I think it's very much going to depend on the game. The games that I think are going to struggle the most as far as the anti-cheat software goes is going to be things like Call of Duty, like Battlefield, like Destiny. I actually think Call of Duty might be the one that is the easiest for it, but it really kind of depends. That being said though, I have played Call of Duty on my Steam Deck before. I don't play Warzone, and I haven't played some of the newer ones on it, but as far as Black Ops 3 and Modern Warfare, I've had no problems with running those. When you're looking at the Steam library as a whole, and you're looking at any individual game, you throw a dart at a game and say, I want to know if this plays on Steam Machine. The good possibility is that yes, it's probably going to play on Steam Machine. The parts where you're going to run into issues, I think, are going to be more multiplayer focused games. However, I don't think that means that they won't play on it. I just think it means that developers need to make sure that they're thinking about it. I think it really is going to depend on a game by game basis, but I would say for the most most part, if you don't have any concerns about multiplayer games specifically, I really do feel like Steam Machine is essentially going to be able to play 80% of what is on the Steam store now, day one out of the box, no questions asked. I think it's just going to depend on it, like I said, on a game-by-game basis. I think it's really going to come down to, if there is an issue, can the developers, make sure that they patch it, and can they make sure that things are running right? But when it comes down to our games like Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk, Final Fantasy VII Remake, big games like that, I think you're going to see no problems at all, mostly. I think it's really going to come down to what your expectations are and what you have been playing on already. If you've been playing on something like a 4090 or like a 5090, I don't think you're going to get as much out of this, and I think honestly, it's not really made for people like that. What I think the Steam Machine is really geared towards is being able to give you a huge library of games that you do not currently have access to. For people coming from the Xbox and the PlayStation ecosystem, I think there is a big misunderstanding of PC gaming, and the fact that a lot of PC games, I think they think are just like RTSs and MMOs, and maybe they think that a lot of PC gaming is really technical and it's very complex and complicated. But the honest truth is, it's just really not. And devices like the Steam Deck and the Steam Machine are really to help bridge that gap. It's to give players more options and more choice, because if you were to send somebody from the Nintendo Switch or from the PlayStation or Xbox and you were to show them the Steam library, they would be shocked at how many games are available that maybe they didn't even realize were still available to purchase. Games from 10, 15 plus years ago that honestly on most storefronts you can't really just go on a PlayStation and find the original game, but rather it would be a remaster or a remake, or you'd have to spend extra money to actually get that original game. But the nice thing is with Steam, you don't really have that. You don't really need to port or remake or remaster everything, because the original game is typically still available to purchase and you can still go ahead and find a way to play it. Obviously, there's going to be the case of delistings and things like that, but the important thing about PC is that your option base is just so much wider and so much bigger as being a part of the PC community. So once you do reach in and you understand that like there are all these options that you just didn't have on the other consoles, that's one of the biggest reasons why I stick around on the PC community and why I don't personally want to go back to console ever again. If you made it to the end of this video, I want to just say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Viewers like you are exactly why I do what I do. So thank you very much for clicking on this video. If you happen to want to watch any more of my videos, click around here to see some more. If you like what you see, subscribe. If you don't, no worries. Just give me some feedback. Everybody stay safe. Have a great rest of your day. And till next time.